Today, we are going to look at relative clauses. These could be at the end of a sentence. However, today we're going to look at them within the middle of a main clause. An easy example of how to write a relative clause is to do a noun, who, which, where sentence. The first example we're going to talk about is a noun, who sentence. Let's have a look. My mother, who was born in 1944, looks very young for her age. Who is the relative pronoun, and this is used to introduce relative clauses. Relative clauses are used to say which person, thing, or place we are talking about, or give extra information. If we remove the relative clause, who was born in 1944, this couldn't be a simple sentence or a main clause, as it wouldn't make sense on its own. If we remove this relative clause, this is what we will be left with. My mother looks very young for her age. This is made up of one clause, usually a noun or a pronoun, the verb and the object, but not always the case. It does make sense on its own, has a capital letter and a full stop. It's basically a simple sentence because it has a full stop at the end. As you can see, I've highlighted the commas in orange. The relative clause ends as it started with a comma. Then the final part of the sentence adds some detail to the opening noun. So the noun is my mother looks very young for her age, adds extra detail about the noun, which was my mother, and finishes with a full stop. Now a noun, who sentence is perfect when describing a noun that is a person. So that is where I would recommend using that type of sentence. So the who is a relative pronoun. Another example of a relative clause is a noun, which sentence. This is when you're describing an object. Let's have a look. Cakes, which taste fantastic, are not so good for your health. Which is the relative pronoun, and this is used to introduce relative clauses. In the previous sentence, who was the relative pronoun, but in this one, it is which. Relative clauses are used to say which person, thing, or place we are talking about, or give extra information. So in this case, we're talking about a thing, and the thing is the cake. That is the noun. If we look at the relative clause, which tastes fantastic, this wouldn't make sense on its own. It couldn't be a simple sentence. It couldn't have a capital letter and a full stop. If we remove the relative clause, which tastes fantastic, we would be left with cakes are not so good for your health. Now this would be a simple sentence. It's made up of one clause, usually a noun or a pronoun, the verb and the object. Not always, but most of the time. It does make sense on its own, and it has a capital letter and a full stop. I've highlighted the commas here in orange. It is really important to surround the relative clause with a comma at the start and a comma at the end. Then the final part of the sentence adds detail to the opening noun. The opening noun was cakes, and then are not so good for your health adds extra detail to your sentence. Hope this makes sense. My last example today of a relative clause in the middle of a sentence is a noun, where sentence. This is perfect when describing a place. The noun will be the place. The garage, where he had his car repaired, has been closed down. Now where is the relative pronoun, and this is used to introduce the relative clauses. Relative clauses are used to say which person, thing or place we are talking about, or give extra information. And in this case, the noun comma where, it's all about the place. And the place is the garage. If we took this relative clause out of the sentence and just left it on its own, where he had his car repaired. Now this couldn't be a simple sentence or a main clause, as it wouldn't make sense on its own. The garage has been closed down. This is what would be left if the relative clause was taken out of the sentence from the middle. Now this is made up of one clause, usually a noun or a pronoun, the verb and the object. Not always, but it does make sense on its own, and it has a capital letter and a full stop. I've highlighted the commas here in orange. These surround the relative clause, and then the final part of the sentence adds some detail to the opening noun, the garage. It closes off, has been closed down. So I hope today's video has helped you understand a little bit more about relative pronouns and relative clauses. So a relative pronoun is who, which, where, to name a few, and a relative clause cannot make sense on its own and always starts with a relative pronoun. So for your task to see how you've got on, what I want you to do is to write the 3 sentences in your books. Could you choose one of the parts above? Took over 25 years to build. King Tutankhamun lived, or was powerful pharaoh. So you're going to choose that and add that to your sentence. Don't forget your punctuation, so you need to include your commas surrounding the relative clause, and you need a capital letter and a full stop at the end. Okay, hope you've understood this activity. If you're getting stuck, watch it again. We're going to put these on the class blogs.